Good day, everybody. Don't let the date fool you here at the Santa Clarita openhouses.com website. This is the video for today, the 18th of August, 2025. Good morning, Connor MacIvor. We're going to talk about real estate inventory. Currently, we have posted 8 coming soon listings in all of Santa Clarita Valley. 71 new listings, 97 price changes, 18 properties have gone back on the market, 39 active under contract, 41 pending, 62 closed this past week, these past 7 days, 7 expired, 15 canceled, 11 been put on hold and withdrawn from the market. We have a total of 10 real estate listings. Let's get into the data this morning. Going to the main sites out there for information, I did pull some data from the multiple listing service for Saugus, California, and I thought it was very interesting looking at what I like to call a heat check for Saugus, and then I'll get into today's real estate information for buyers out there as we've gone through the whole process. Made decisions whether or not you should be buying a house, how to get your best deal from a lender, and then of course real estate agent, and then from that point what you should be looking for in the resale realm or with new housing, and then how to vet those properties before you even write an offer, and then the strategy, how much you're going to pay. You're going to pay the full listing price, you're going to actually go above listing price, you're going to go below listing price, and what's the best ways for you to be able to do that so the seller of course doesn't take offense or get upset, because that's the last thing you want to do. You're in a business arrangement, you're trying to get into a business arrangement, you want to make the best offer possible while still trying to get the best deal, right? You don't want to turn anybody off. You just want to go in with everything you can, basically fully armed with all the resources and data points you can provide if in fact you are going to be undercutting their price. But in addition, even if you're going to be going in at full list price, having that offer structure that shows that you've done more than just any typical buyer out there is incredibly important. And I think it was video 3. If you just go to santaclaritaopenhouses.com/blog, I think it was video 3, video 4, you'll see where I talked about preparing to make that offer. And you as a real estate buyer can do an awful lot of investigation before you've even seen sellers' disclosures, before you've hired that home inspector, before you've done any of those investigations. You can get a lot of this information from public record and also via your real estate agent if they're savvy enough to be able to pull the data, and that information that you've gathered just to make the offer, conveying that to the seller really does win over big. But we'll talk about what's happening in the process after the offer's been accepted. I did a video on that, your time frames, and today we're going to be talking about after you get done with that request for repairs, what happens if the seller denies you, what happens if they accept you, and then those next parts of the real estate process. So just breaking down Saugus, and Saugus is one of the cities in the Santa Clarita Valley. Santa Clarita Valley is typically, and my speller, when I put the captions on, it's going to eat these up, but it's Castaic, Canyon Country, Newhall, Saugus, Stevenson Ranch, and Valencia. These are the cities that typically compose the Santa Clarita Valley. Acton and Agua Dulce are also cities that people consider to be as part of the Santa Clarita Valley. Now, Acton is just south of Palmdale. Up the 14 freeways, general access to that. You can also take Sierra Highway and so on, but that's basically where it's positioned. And our furthest southern city is going to be Newhall, California, which is going to that particular border, and 91381 as well is going to be butting up against the most northern point of the city of Los Angeles boundary. So the city of Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley, which is the city of Los Angeles, their most northern boundary is our most southern boundary here in Santa Clarita Valley. So that's kind of the particular where we're located. And of course, the 5 freeway on the left side or the west side as you're coming north, and the 14 freeway on the right or the east side as you're coming north. So that's it. Basically inside of a Y is the Santa Clarita Valley. When people are searching for real estate, Saugus is really something that people enjoy. It has a kind of a really nice feel. There are newer houses there as well. We have Central Park in Saugus. There's a lot of other amenities in Saugus that people really find attractive. So that's something to look for. Also, Saugus seems to there's not great freeway access, but it does provide some of the wonderful infrastructure here in Santa Clarita Valley as far as restaurants, shopping, entertainment as well. But it also has some areas where hiking and trails are also in close proximity to most of the residences. That's something else people really like. So let's talk about what's happening with that 30-day heat check here in Saugus. We have 116 active listings currently. 19 listings are under contract, 19 pending, 39 sold in the last 30 days. So this is that 30-day overall snapshot of a particular city, and today's Saugus. So the list price pulse, as I like to talk about, the median price is $961. That equates to about $391 per square foot. You don't see square footage pricing much out here in Southern California. You get east of the Mississippi, it seems to be more prevalent. In fact, even out here, when you're looking at residential real estate online, I know I talk to a lot of people that are relocating from out east, not as many as before. Don't know why that is. But anyway, so there are not as many coming out, but they often ask for bedroom sizes. And in lots of cases, you're not going to see that breakdown. But when you start to search for properties further east from here, you'll see a breakdown of dimensions per room. How big the main bedroom is, how big, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, bedroom 3, the sizes of the kitchen, the living room, the family room, these sorts of things. So you'll see that there are those breakdowns with regard to square footage per room, and also a square footage, a price per square foot for the overall house. Out here we have it listed, but it's not really talked about too much. 46 median, the 46 time frame is the median days on market time frame. 46 days for days on market. That's the median time frame. So typical, when you see houses coming on the market, it's going to depend on how fast that house gets into escrow. If it gets into escrow quickly, it could be finished in 30 to 40 days once it's listed for sale. But it's going to depend on the property and, of course, the area, the inventory as well, and also the buyer drive. So now we have closed deals. The closed ones around $426 per square foot. We had 34 days on market in the median realm to get those properties into escrow. 23% did go pending in just about 10 days. So it didn't take that long for the current 30-day snapshot here in Saugus, California. Overall, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 days is where the market happens to be, because we've had an uptick in inventory lately. As of this morning, we're at 789 total active listings, not just Saugus, but all of Santa Clarita, California. And of course, we have 69% do have a view that they're talking about. What kind of view? Well, in some cases, it's not a great view. Maybe you jump from a standing position in the backyard and you can see something. So that's kind of the criteria for a view. Others have fantastic views, no backyard neighbors and these sorts of things. So if you see it advertised with a view, maybe you can have your agent follow up. Hey, what kind of view is this? What does it look like? And if the pictures don't notate it, it's probably not a great view. Or if you see somebody on a crane trying to get the view of the property, you get an idea what I'm talking about. 24% of these properties that are currently active on the market for sale have pools. And, right now, 23%, Saugus, you're going to get a larger lot in a lot of cases. So 23% of those are sitting on somewhere a quarter-acre, 10% are more than an acre. And the largest that's for sale currently is 11.1 acres. You can see all of this at SantaClaritaOpenHouses.com. We do have 27% of the actives that are built in 2015 or more, which is good, so newer houses. But some of the old houses in Saugus, the older properties, have had such great attention paid to them by those sellers that there's definitely something that needs to be considered, because a lot of times when sellers maintain a property, they pretty much go forever. They'll be replacing things here and there over time, but that really does equate to the house having survived many different events here in Southern California. Of course, earthquakes, fires, floods. If it's there for a while, you can pretty much rest assured that you're going to be good to go in the future. That's something that people look at and don't often consider when they're looking at new housing versus resale housing in the older types of houses on the property. Quick take here, we have an entry to $1 million. That's about the sweet spot out here in Saugus, California, depending. You can find stuff at $700,000-800,000 as well. And also looking at the financing, FHA and VA is flying really strong out here in Saugus, California. And make sure that you double check that inventory at SantaClaritaOpenHouses.com. As a real estate buyer, here's the informational portion of today's show. As a real estate buyer, there are there is that time that you get into escrow on a property. And after you've done the request for repairs, now you're waiting for the seller to respond. The seller usually gets back rather quickly, and if you've provided enough information to them so they can make their decision without thinking that you're trying to gouge them or take advantage of them, that's very much helpful. But if they come back and they say they're not going to do any repairs or any of the things you're asking for, they're not going to give you any credits, they're not going to repair anything, then where are you as a buyer? Well, that's something that you should expect as being a potential result. It is possible that the seller's not going to do anything, even health and safety related things. As I spoke about yesterday, when the appraiser that goes out to the property, which is going to be your appraiser because you're going to be getting a loan on the property. If they go out and they say something, usually that's attended to, because they're not going to loan money on the property unless that's taken care of by the seller. But the other things that you might be asking for, you might be asking for a pool pump to be replaced, or you might be asking for some kind of change to the electrical panel because there's a safety issue. Maybe there's a pinhole leak, maybe there's missing roof tiles or cracked roof tiles or torn paper, these sorts of things. These are things that a lot of people ask for when it comes to request for repair, and at the end of the day, the seller could deny it. Now, the seller has to think, we've been in escrow this amount of time, and now if I play hardball and do not do what the buyer's asking, or at least try to mediate it somehow, maybe meet them halfway, quarter way, little way, instead of maybe giving them some credit, saying, listen, I have a really good contractor of mine who's going to do a great job. He's not going to rip us off, though. He might be able to get this done, so I'm going to counter with, I'll hire a professionally bonded, insured, licensed, good reputation contractor to be able to take care of this issue. If that's the case, and that's phenomenal, but maybe the buyer might not like that. But let's say that's what they come back with. Then the buyer has a decision to make. The buyer can say, okay, we'll move forward or we won't. But finally, it is that choice. Now, the seller needs to think, okay, so if I counter back with nothing, say I'm not going to do it, what are the chances are the buyer's going to cancel? That should be a discussion that the agents have amongst themselves. But again, that ex parte communication crap really doesn't fly great for me in real estate, because that's usually the beginning of any kind of listing. You get that phone call from other agents. Hey, what do you think your seller will take? Maybe your seller's overpriced. What do you think? They're trying to get to the bottom of it, and unless I have explicit written permission by my seller to be able to give up what our pricing strategy happens to be, then I can. I say, well, the price is this. That's what it is. That's what's listed. I don't have permission from my seller to be able to answer your questions related to what they will take on the home. That's it. So it's a listing price. So that's a good agent in response to somebody else trying to inquire. As the seller looks at this, how long is it going to take them to get into escrow again? If maybe the first time it took 10 to 15 to 20 days, do they have buyers that are so interested, and is this cost to them worth basically saying we're not going to do anything and having our property go back on the market? Now, their agent might do their due diligence and call around. Maybe there was multiple offers at the beginning, and there are those buyers that are positioned and ready. But usually the second crack at the apple, sometimes the buyers are going to say, the buyers that were there at the beginning that didn't get selected to get into escrow, they might say, well, I wonder what happened. I wonder what's wrong with the house. And then when they find out, because now those investigations and further reports that were completed by the past buyer that's about to leave escrow because the seller's not going to help, those now become part of the record, and those documents are then shown to the new buyer. Then that buyer's going to probably hire their own home inspector anyway, and then put on top of that, maybe the seller did a pre-marketing home inspection. So now you got all these reports. So the new buyer comes in and they have not only the report by their home inspector, they have the report by the buyer's home inspector, and then they have the report from you doing a pre-market sales home inspection. So they have 3 home inspection reports. So they can take all these, and if they're somewhat savvy, they can plug everything into one of the large language models, ChatGPT, or one of the AI interfaces, and say, hey, what's the difference between all these? They're going to come up with differences. They're going to come up with things that were talked about in one as being a big deal, and maybe things that were discounted in another one that aren't a big deal. But that's going to create confusion. Where do they go from there? So are they going to give you the same price that that previous buyer did, even with these types of repairs? What's this delay going to create for you? Is it going to make it so you have to make an additional payment? You have to pay more in HOA, more in taxes? So you have to look at all of these other things that could be detrimental to your home sale. You have the buyer. If you agree to these terms, they're not going to be coming back with something later, because the terms that you agree with should always be placed. You doing these things or giving this credit in lieu of all other inquiries, repairs, and all of those sorts of things. So you definitely want to write it up where if you're going to give a credit, this credit is being given in lieu of all repairs. If you're going to be fixing things, you're fixing things in lieu of all repairs. So that basically cinches that up. What's that price tag going to be? And this doesn't mean you as sellers have to do that, but it's something to definitely consider, because the buyer could walk. Now, they could walk for other reasons, but usually that request for repairs comes at a point where they're getting very close to removing all of their contingencies. Once that happens, the way the process is supposed to work, if they cancel after they've removed all of their contingencies, then their deposit, as I talked about a few videos ago, that 3%, if that's where their market happens to be, becomes your property if they cancel after that. Now, everything's subject to litigation. Everything is subject to argument, of course, but contractually, that's kind of how it is. If somebody cancels after they've removed all their contingencies, that deposit becomes property of the seller. Buyers know that. That should be explained to them in that process. So usually that request for repairs comes right about that time when they're going to be removing their contingencies. So once that gets close to being done, it can be poised if the seller accepts this, or if the buyer accepts this, then the buyer to remove all of their contingencies as per contractual timeframes. And usually that's what happens. It's just basically plays out that way, where after the seller agrees to some kind of a request for repairs, as part of that agreement, the buyer now needs to step forward and perform on the timeline, which would be them removing all of their contingencies. And then once that happens, the seller is pretty much good to close for escrow. And that's when I tell my sellers, after that point, typically, now you can start going to look for real estate. Now you can start writing offers on real estate, more serious offers, because anything before you get past that point, it's going to be asked by the seller's agent on the other end, on the house that you're buying as a seller, where are they in the process of the sale of their residence? And in fact, if the sale of your house has to happen, if it's dependent on you buying something else, this one has to happen in order for you to buy something. That's that question that usually goes out by the agents, because we always entertain those offers that are contingent on the seller selling something. But as part of that, we want to know a lot of the particulars about the house that the seller is selling via another agent. So then I'll communicate with the agent. I'll try to find out where they are in the process, what was the pricing strategy like, and where are they? Are they past this removal of contingencies? Does the seller have some kind of verification that they can provide their agent, that they can provide to me, that where the seller is basically past this point of no return on their buyer's end of it? Now, if we have other offers that are non-contingent, usually those are going to shine above the contingent ones. But in some cases, it works out that the agreement, the proof, the showing at the beginning, whenever the contract is written, it's given verifiable things that my particular buyer seller at that point can look at and say, well, these people do seem solid. Their house is this far past the point of no return. It looks like they're going to be closing next week. Let's maybe entertain it because maybe they came back at a higher offering price. But there's always risk there too. What if they get to that request for repairs point and look at that as something that they're going to use to renegotiate the price and ask for some massive discount because of things discovered, which where the things discovered really aren't that big of a deal. Well, if you cancel that, the buyers then are going to have to cancel their home purchase. And so it's like this chain that can really be quite long. You could have deal upon deal upon deal depending on everything closing all the way through the chain. And the weakest link, of course, will destroy the chain, so everything cancels. That's the danger in going into these transactions when you have multiple contingent deals. When they call me and they have that offer, I want to know where they are. I want to know who their lending is, what's the financing, what are the buyer types, what are they looking to do, and then, are they going to be owner-occupant buyers, are they investor buyers, because those offer different kinds of strategies. Typically, cash investment buyers are looking to pick up a deal versus a regular person that wants to live in a house and exist there, family or not, but wants to just live there. Usually, they're not as constrictive, conservative, and a little bit more malleable than you will find in an investor. And investors are always looking for a good deal. So knowing that type of buyer, what they are on the other end of the transaction is very important when you're considering a contingent deal. Now, after all these considerations are given, the seller comes back and agrees, then pretty much after that point, you're going to have some honey-do things for the lender. They're probably going to ask you for more documentation. They're probably going to ask you for renewed pay stubs, renewed verification of employment, different things like that. So the faster the buyer performs on those, the better they're going to be. So you're going to want to respond to your lender quickly. You're going to want to get them information quickly as possible, as quick as possible. Now, if you're working for a city entity, sometimes it's very difficult to get these updated documents and it takes time. That's why you really need to prepare for that, especially if you're working for the LAPD or county sheriffs. In some cases, trying to get some kind of verification might take a while. Maybe that system has changed. I've seen a couple recently that they move pretty quickly. But just go in knowing that you're going to have to deal with these other entities from your employer, and if you don't hit it off with them, they can make it a little painful for you. But the faster now the buyer performs on that end, the better. And then after that, everything pretty much goes as is without an issue. You're going to be signing loan documents at some point, and one of the things that I'll throw out there for buyers when you are signing loan documents, make sure it is as you were promised. Usually that notary, the escrow notary that's going to go out and have you sign those documents, is very well versed in this. This isn't they're going to be their first rodeo for the most part. I mean, everybody has to start somewhere. But usually they're being trained by somebody if they are learning. And after they have learned and have trained and have done their journeyman or whatever they call it in that world, then they're usually very good and very versed. If you're getting an interest rate that's different than you were promised or that you understood, it's time to stand up and have a talk. If you're seeing charges for things that you didn't expect, it's time to stop the process and have a discussion. I remember I was working with a lender at one point that had some massive charges as we sat down with the clients, and it's not always I'll sit down with clients when it comes to signing escrow documents unless they want to. So when they're signing their lending documents through escrow with that escrow notary, in some cases, we see big charges, hundreds of dollars for mailings, hundreds of dollars for this and that. And to me, that's a problem. So, and especially the client, they're like, what's this $800 charge for Federal Express? I said, well, let's find out. No idea. So we call the lender, which they brought to me, and the lender says, oh, sorry about that. That's a mistake. You can get rid of it. Well, that's a problem, see, because my thought is, oh my God, If there's one mistake for this, how many other mistakes are going to be like this? So the whole process has to stop, and that delays time, and then it costs money to start drawing these things. So it's important to make sure everything's correct, but also the lenders know this, the real estate agents know this, and if you do have an issue, you have a right to say, you know what, this isn't what we agreed to. We need to figure out what this is before we move forward, and then everybody's put on notice. So as a buyer, understand that you do have that right. When it comes to signing things, you should understand it completely. The days of agents just docu-signing something over to somebody using liquid ink or, this one of these, what do they call it in the government, the PIN, the anonymous PIN, or anyway, signing something without reading it is horribly bad. You should go through whatever you need to sign and understand at least the most part of it. At least look at it, read it, and before you sign anything. And if you need it explained, then you should contact, a legal professional, your realtor, whatever it may be. But you should understand what you're signing and then explore it. You can use a lot of these AI systems to do that very thing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. We will be back tomorrow, and we will put together more information. Now, of course, I did this looking at Santa Clarita openhouses.com. So you can see that's where the system is. This will be changed over to the 18th, and the new video will be plugged in here. But when you're ready, please reach out to me. I would love to help you. You can see all of the listings active here in Santa Clarita Valley for the Saugus write-up that I did this morning. You can see what's going on here in Saugus, California, all of the current active listings that happen to be for sale. You'll also see that I plugged these in under contract. So this is a property that went out rather quickly, and you can see this one here as well. But you'll be able to see all of the real estate listings that are currently for sale in any city in Santa Clarita Valley. And of course, there is no registration required. Feel free to search as much as you want. And if you want to get on my calendar to have us talk about a potential strategy for you, you can do that here at the bottom of the page. You'll see the calendar plug-in just down here. You'll be able to choose a date, and then we'll take it from there. I'm Connor with Honor. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Be well.